She tore down his fence, unaware it stood on protected historic land. Then she called in fake cops to intimidate a veteran on his own property. But when she crashed a memorial, screaming, "I make the rules," everything flipped. What happened next? You won't believe. Let's start from the beginning. The fence, the trespass, the shock. Walter Ellison had just pulled into his gravel driveway when he noticed something strange, too much light flooding through the backside of his yard. The ancient cedar fence that once shielded his property from prying eyes was gone. Not broken, not collapsed from age or weather. Completely removed, like someone had reached down and erased a piece of his life. He stepped out of his truck, instinctively scanning the perimeter. The fence had stood for nearly 80 years, built by his grandfather, rebuilt twice by Walter himself, and more than just wood and nails. It had marked the edge of Clover Field, a piece of land his family had protected for generations. Now, just flattened grass, fresh tire marks, and a woman standing dead center in the open field, tapping something on her tablet. She wore a bright pink windbreaker and oversized sunglasses, the kind that tried and failed to scream sophistication. When she noticed him, she gave a wave, a cheerful one, like a neighbor offering cookies. Walter's stomach dropped. "Excuse me," he called, walking toward her. "What happened to my fence?" She didn't even turn around. "It was in violation of HOA Ordinance 17A6, she said with a syrupy lilt. "Fences over 48 inches in community view corridors are considered non-compliant. You should have received a notice." "I don't live in an HOA," Walter said, the edge in his voice rising. "That land isn't covered under any community contract. It's historical property, my property." At that, she turned and smiled like she was talking to a confused child. "Oh, honey, everything in this subdivision is subject to the HOA. We had a vote back in March. It passed." Walter's fists clenched. "And you tore it down without notice? Who gave you the right?" "I did," she chirped. "Karen Delaney, interim enforcement chair." He was still processing her audacity when a dusty silver pickup rolled into the field, tires crunching the edges of what used to be sacred ground. On each door was a fading magnet. Neighborhood security. Community first enforcement. Two men jumped out, one heavy-set with a cigarette tucked behind his ear, the other lean with aviators and a clipboard. Their uniforms didn't match, their badges were plastic. Their attitude, however, was real. "We got a disturbance report," the heavy one said, stepping between Walter and Karen like he was breaking up a brawl. "Who are you?" Walter demanded. "We're contracted HOA security, just here to de-escalate." Karen folded her arms smugly. "I called them. He's being aggressive." Walter stared at her in disbelief. "You trespassed. You destroyed a registered fence on protected land. You brought in fake cops. And now you're calling me aggressive?" The lean one stepped closer. "Sir, we suggest you calm down, or we'll have to write you up for community disruption." "Write me up?" Walter scoffed. "What is this, kindergarten?" "Sir," the fake officer said, holding up a hand like he was a traffic cop. "Stand back." Walter didn't move. That night, he sat on his porch, a cold sweat clinging to his skin despite the humid air. Across the yard, the field was no longer familiar. It felt naked. His wife's roses had once bloomed beside that fence. His daughter had taken her first steps near its gate. The wood had held memories, secrets, history. Gone. Worse than the violation was the look in Karen's eyes. Like she owned the story now, like she had the power to rewrite it. But Walter had seen real tyrants before, and this one had no idea who she had just awakened. The history they tried to erase. The morning after the fence was torn down, Walter stood over a box in his garage, the early light spilling through the cracked side door. Dust floated through the air like ash, and every item he lifted felt heavier than it should have. Maps, old photographs, letters yellowed with age. Everything he needed to prove that Clover Field wasn't just some patch of grass in a cookie-cutter neighborhood. It was a place that mattered. His fingers found the certificate from the South Carolina Historical Preservation Office. It was dated May 3, 1986. Walter remembered the day clearly. His father had cried, a man who'd survived 2 wars and never cried before. This land, according to the certificate, sat on top of one of the few remaining unmarked routes of the Underground Railroad in the region, and now it was wide open to trespassers and HOA tyrants. He stared at the page and whispered under his breath, "She has no idea what she destroyed." Across the street, Karen Delaney strutted down the sidewalk in a lemon-yellow cardigan, clipboard in hand. She paused at every mailbox, slipping something inside. Notices, citations, threats disguised as polite reminders. One neighbor opened his door just a crack when she passed, then shut it quickly when their eyes met. Walter had seen this kind of fear before, not just in battle, but in bureaucracy. People weren't afraid of violence. They were afraid of trouble, of being targeted, of being alone. By noon, Walter had already counted 3 more homes with violation tags hanging from doorknobs. A car with a dented bumper, a basketball hoop too close to the sidewalk, a dog bowl left outside overnight. Each was punished with a paper warning, signed Delaney, Interim Compliance Officer. Interim, like she was self-appointed, like she gave herself the power to rule over them all. Walter walked to his kitchen and dialed a number he hadn't called in a decade. "Charlotte? It's Walt. You still work with the historical board?" Charlotte was quiet for a beat. "Yeah, I do. What's going on?" "I've got a situation. My property's been vandalized by someone claiming HOA authority over protected land." There was a pause, then a slow, careful response. "Say her name." "Karen Delaney." Another pause. "She's come up before. 3 complaints, no proof. Everyone always backs down." "Well," Walter said, fire now building in his chest. "Not this time." That afternoon, he photocopied every page of documentation. He laid it out on his dining table like a general preparing for war. Fence blueprints, letters from the Preservation Council, an article from 1992 about the gullah roots of Clover Field, every piece a nail in Karen's coffin. He didn't want revenge. Not at first. But as the sun began to set and shadows stretched across the bare field, he realized this wasn't just about him. Karen wasn't trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful. She was trying to erase history she didn't understand, and didn't care to. And those fake officers, Carl and Dennis, they weren't just goons. They were enforcers of her little kingdom, moving unchecked, unchallenged. Until now. Walter stood in his yard as night fell, the old field silent beneath the stars. And for the first time since it happened, he felt something unexpected. Not grief, not fear. Conviction. The kind that comes when a man remembers who he is and what he's sworn to protect. The trap is set, and springs shut. 3 days after the fence was torn down, Walter met with Inspector June Whitaker at a local diner off Highway 17. She was sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and carried herself like someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with liars in polished shoes. She listened carefully as Walter spread out his copies on the table. Official documents, photos of the site, footage from his porch cam showing the demolition crew and the unmarked security truck. When he finished, she sat back, lips tight. "You've done more groundwork than some attorneys I know." Walter gave a tired smile. "That fence has been there since 1943. She tore down a piece of my family." "And state history," June added. "And if we can verify those 2 men as unauthorized enforcers, Well, then we've got impersonation, harassment, and possibly conspiracy. Karen didn't just step over the line, Walter said. She burned it. That night, Walter began walking the neighborhood with a folder tucked under his arm. He didn't knock on doors. He waited for moments, someone bringing in groceries, watering flowers, checking mail. He'd stop, smile gently, then say one thing. "You ever have problems with Karen?" Every time, the response came with a sigh. A look over the shoulder, a quiet yes. The Robinsons had been fined $300 for their wind chimes. Mrs. Patel was told to repaint her entire porch after one crack appeared in a step. A single mom down the block had received 9 violations in 2 weeks for things like a child's bike leaning against the garage or excessive grass length. Karen's rule wasn't just strict, it was selective. And worse, it was enforced by fear. Carl and Dennis, the so-called security team, had reportedly patrolled at night with flashlights and threatened fines for parked cars and unauthorized guests. No one questioned them, because no one wanted to be the next target. Until Walter knocked. He compiled testimonials. He started recording video from his window every time Carl or Dennis drove by. He caught one of them drinking beer in the truck. Another time he filmed Karen giving them a manila envelope through her car window. He printed every image, dated every frame. But the final spark came unexpectedly. A local journalist, Melissa Ray from Channel 6, reached out after hearing rumors from a preservation board contact. She wanted to cover the case, maybe do a feature on Cloverfield's history and the conflict brewing in a quiet HOA neighborhood. Walter agreed. And then he set the trap. He planned a small memorial gathering on a Sunday afternoon, a tribute to his grandfather and the history of the field. He invited neighbors, printed flyers, even coordinated with the local Veterans Association. But he also made a few quiet calls. One to Inspector Whitaker, another to the county sheriff's office, and finally one last message posted to the HOA community board, knowing Karen would see it. Historical field dedication this Sunday. All are welcome. Sunday came. Chairs were set. Flags fluttered. Elderly veterans arrived with medals pinned to their lapels. Neighbors cautiously stepped out from behind fences, drawn by curiosity and a sense that something was about to change. And then, just as the event began, Karen's SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of the property. Carl and Dennis jumped out of the pickup behind her, one already shouting something about unauthorized use of public space. Karen stormed forward, red-faced, pointing fingers. "This is not HOA approved. You people can't just do what you want." She didn't notice the woman in a blazer filming everything with a body cam, or the plainclothes man watching Carl's every movement with a quiet, knowing smile. Or Walter, standing tall in front of the crowd, holding the official preservation file in his hand like a sword. What happened next wouldn't just shake the neighborhood. It would be broadcast across the entire state. Justice served and remembered. The moment Karen opened her mouth to shut down the memorial, the crowd went still. Not out of fear, but out of disbelief. She wasn't just interrupting a peaceful gathering. She was screaming at a group of elderly veterans standing beneath an American flag. "You're all in violation," she yelled. "This is HOA property. You need permits for this kind of thing." Walter didn't move. He stood at the edge of the field, holding the sealed folder from the South Carolina Historical Preservation Office. His hand didn't shake. His voice didn't crack. "This isn't your land, Karen," he said. "It never was." She lunged toward him, red in the face, but 2 plainclothes agents stepped between them. The woman with the body cam, Agent Whitaker, stepped forward and spoke with the kind of calm that silenced everything. "Karen Delaney, you are being served with a cease and desist order from the state of South Carolina. You are under investigation for destruction of protected historical property, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, and criminal harassment." Karen froze. "This is a mistake. This is harassment." I make the rules here." Walter looked directly at her. "Not anymore." Behind her, Carl and Dennis were being separated and cuffed by real sheriff's deputies. The crowd began murmuring. A few people stepped forward to record on their phones. Mrs. Patel held up her phone with trembling hands, whispering, "Oh my God, it's finally happening." Agent Whitaker turned to the crowd. "This land, Clover Field, is under full protection of the state. The demolition of the historic fencing was illegal. The HOA's enforcement actions here have overstepped their authority." A wave of gasps spread through the neighbors like a ripple. Karen's defiance broke into sputtering denials. "They're making this up. These people are lying. I was trying to keep the neighborhood safe." But no one stepped in to support her. No one defended her. Not this time. Within the hour, Karen was escorted off the property. Her SUV was towed. Carl and Dennis were booked for impersonating officers, operating without security licenses, and resisting arrest. The HOA board issued a statement 2 days later, claiming they had no knowledge of Karen's abuse of power and immediately removed her from any official capacity. But the damage was done, and so was the reckoning. The news story aired the following Friday. Walter stood in front of a backdrop of newly erected fencing, donated by a local veterans group, and spoke into the microphone. "This land belonged to my family long before there were cul-de-sacs and HOA bylaws. It holds history, painful, powerful history, and it deserves to be respected." His voice didn't tremble. His shoulders didn't sag. "I hope this serves as a reminder. No one, no matter how loud or entitled, has the right to rewrite our past." The story went viral. Neighbors left cards at Walter's door. One brought fresh pie. Another offered to help mow the lawn. A group of teenagers from down the block even painted a small mural on the back of his shed. A cedar fence, standing tall, wrapped in vines, with the words, "We remember." And just below it, in bold brushstroke, "This land will remember everything." Walter hung the preservation certificate back in his study, above his wife's old bookshelf. Sometimes he'd glance at it and smile, not out of pride, but peace. Not long after, Clover Field was officially rededicated as a state landmark. A plaque was installed, this time in steel, with the names of the families who'd lived along its borders for decades. And Walter? Every morning, he walked the line of his rebuilt fence, not to check for damage, but to remind himself he was no longer fighting to protect something. He had already won.